Hi, folks. I'm Adrian Sanabria, the host of Enterprise Security Weekly. Every week, we interview the most interesting folks we can find, talking about the most pressing cybersecurity issues and challenges facing the enterprise today. Myself and my co-hosts have each been in the industry for decades, long enough to see the patterns in the industry and explore where trends are going. In addition to enterprise challenges, we also follow the vendor space, the most interesting security startups emerging, technology and product trends, all the most interesting funding and acquisition announcements. Finally, we love to discuss the latest trends in tech and how they'll impact cybersecurity. If you're wondering how the latest in AI, quantum computing, cloud, and DevOps is going to impact security a few years down the road, you should follow the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Lena Lau about techniques for crafting presentations that entertain an audience and still deliver a message that they remember, including that audience of yourself first, because if you're not entertained, nor are they going to be. I'm your host, Mike Shima, here to hopefully entertain you, and I have some help with John Kinsella and Akira Brand. And it's just about time for the news. And we're even going to skip the announcements this week. So we give our plenty of time to John and Akira and all the fun news we have. Akira, we haven't seen you in a while. Good to have you with us.
So good to be back.
So one of the articles that you grabbed was the RSA CFP is open. So that feels pretty topical. A good tie-in that we just had a fun discussion with Lena about what a good abstract looks like. So listeners, hopefully you were paying attention to that, and you can throw your CFP together. I don't know, Akira, do you have a CFP that you're working on as well for this at the moment?
I'm actually going to talk about the impacts of climate change on AppSec teams. So we'll see if I get accepted.
That is interesting. I have so many follow-up questions. Mm-hmm. We'll see. We'll save those to the end because there's some other articles that come here. We'll have to go to RSA because we don't want to reveal all the spoilers here.
I'm
sorry. That CFP approved.
I would totally go to that talk. That talk sounds like something that should be accepted.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying so.
Speaking of talking about things, John, we also mentioned, speaking of abstracts, we mentioned what could ChatGPT do for abstracts?
Speaking of abstracts,
CFPs, John, the abstract person who's a co-host, and cats. Okay, you have an article. Let me just throw this over to you before I get too distracted by cats walking across my keyboard. Consultants performing worse. What's going on here?
Yeah. This is, so I threw this in here a little bit of a, damn lies and statistics. I'm going to file it underneath that. But the BCG is one of the larger consultancies out there. They did this study with Fortune magazine. And it doesn't seem like it's too scientific, but the general idea here is what they're saying is through talking to the consultants within BCG and looking at the outputs that they have, they're seeing statistically around 23% less, what were they referring to it as, worse, compared to if people actually just do the work themselves. And really, this is lies, damn lies statistics. We know GPT can be used for good, GPT can be used for bad. As Lena was saying, we can use it to go ahead and either create our talk, well, not our talks, please, create our submissions, or review them, or make them funnier or better, or, all those type of things. But let's, the reason I put it in here today is when we are, if we're looking at, using a new plugin for VS Code to do GPT with our code, make our code better, or, we're looking at a vendor and they're saying, hey, it's got AI and it's going to be better. Any of these things are possible, but take a step back and think about, okay, is this actually what it's doing, or is this going to make my life 23% worse?
No, I like that. I think for me too, the LLMs are fun. They can be fun to play with. They can be useful for your assistance, as you said, like helping with the abstract. I'll even add too, many times presenters come and English is not their first language. So there can be an aspect of refining that abstract so that it's not just misjudged or poorly judged against because of poor grammar or the indicators that English is not your primary language. But I think too, if we come back to the idea of just LLMs and security, it can write some code, it can assist with some code, but I haven't seen anything where it's making your life easier because you still got to review the code You've still got to figure out, does this make sense from an architectural point of view? As Lena pointed out, if you have some new novel research, the LLM hasn't been trained on new novel research, nor does it have that personal story. It can take something that's been cribbed together from what other people have told, published in blog posts, but that's just this Markov chain of craziness of bringing together nouns and adjectives and adverbs and other geekery about the English language. And we've possibly
got a human.
Still got a human. Lots of humans in bug bounties, for example, and but maybe not so much love for those humans, or perhaps maybe not so much love for the process. Tell us about this article, John.
So I saw this on Hackaday, place I read fairly frequently. But they were throwing over to something I hadn't heard of, Zig language, which I had a quickie on here. Zig is a general purpose programming language and toolchain for maintaining robust, optimal, and reusable software. For those who don't know, now you do. But anyways, they have a blog post out there saying bounties damage open source projects. And I get where they're coming from. I brought it in here because, we're obviously fans of these bounties. Mike and I, we've both talked about them a lot. I know Akira's a big fan, even though she hasn't mentioned them, because we're all fans of bug bounties. But not everyone is. She's like, wait, am I? But on the other side, if you're an open source project, and I've seen this from a different point of view. I've seen this from the point of view of like Google Summer of Code or, Summer of Code is good. There's like a Hack Week or Hack Month where people get to submit PRs. So a lot of these type of things, I could see this being bad and the same type of thing. You've got a part-timer usually, well, in the olden days, a part-timer is working on an open source project, something they thought of on a weekend was a great idea, and they're hacking away on it, they're 2 hours a night while they're eating dinner over TV. And suddenly you've got someone like saying, hey, I'm getting $5,000 because I found this bug in your software, pay up, or what have you. It's a distraction in a way. And that's sort of the point of where this blog post is going. And really what they're saying, I think the line they have in there is, unless you are like got $1 billion software company behind you, a bug bounty for open source is sort of, it's that. I think they're going at it a little bit. I think there's a happy medium between these two. But I thought it was an interesting point of view to highlight for a moment of, well, we're always talking about threat modeling and bug bounties and all these great, amazing things. As with GPT, not everything is loved by everyone. There's always a good idea.
I'm actually going to push back a little bit, John. I don't necessarily love bug bounties. So there you go. And what I'll say is, okay, let me just speak from personal experience. At a startup that I worked at, there was talk about doing a bug bounty program, right? And we decided to not do one because we didn't have a robust enough AppSec program to catch the bugs as they were coming in from the bug bounty people, as it were. And what we decided is that, like, had we opened up this bug bounty program, we would have just like been paying out for stuff that like a SAS scanner or a DAS scanner could find. So we decided to not do that. Now, I feel like sometimes, especially in startup world, sometimes you can get kind of like this idea of like, well, like Google does it, like Amazon does it, like maybe we should do it. And that's not always the best way to go. So I would say I do like bug bounties if you have like a robust enough AppSec program to, like I said, catch it or be able to manage the influx of information that you'll get. I know for myself too, like I've had a couple times where someone's like reached out and been like, like I found a bug and you need to pay me like $5,000. And I'm like, no, I don't, man. Like it's on my dashboard with Sneak. Like I know what you're talking about, so it can be a little bit like you have to have the people power behind your bug bounty program to be able to like deal with that kind of nonsense as well. Like people just trying to exploit you and take it from you. Like yeah.
Yes, that comes into the beg bounty aspect of these programs. Yes. And as you pointed out, to reinforce the idea that there's why subsidize other people to run a scanner for you when you should have done that first? So there is definitely a maturity step for your AppSec program to be at a certain level, you have some confidence that you've at least looked for some vulns before you encourage and incentivize others to do so. And even in this case, maybe I'll tie this with John's other article about the LLM, is that sure, you could have a chat GPT triage some of these or respond to the researchers and say, hey, please, can you give us some more information about the reproduction aspects of this? But you're still putting burden on the developers to fix something or figure out, does this even need to be fixed? And that is human burden that is not, you can't fully shove off onto all of these GPT. Hopefully they can make it easier, reduce some of the toil. But this is where I still come in, as LLMs are just on the periphery, making a couple of things easier for us, but they haven't fully solved any problems. Mm-hmm. And haven't solved what other kinds of problems haven't been solved. Lots of vulnerabilities this week. I found one that was about some attackers impersonating commit messages that make it look like here's a commit from Dependabot. Go merge this, do some things. What was interesting to me is that it's with impersonation, spoofing. This falls in that category of perhaps phishing, etc. There is a defense against this in GitHub. You can enable vigilant mode, which indicates that this is a signed commit and it has a nice visual indicator that this is a signed commit and it's been verified. But it feels almost like that is a step back towards the little lock icon in the browsers. We're again pushing the responsibility for security onto the end user to say, well, this came from Dependabot probably, but just to make sure, look for the little green checkbox or look for the little green lock icon. And so that's why I want there to be more here as a defense mechanism, or make sure that we aren't just always pushing that solution onto end users. So that's more of my comment, and I don't have any questions. So I don't know if that triggered something in either of you, Akira, John.
It did for me. I think that's a really interesting point, the comparison between the checkbox in the Dependabot, well, the signed commit and Git compared to the green lock. I mean, the signed commit it's fragile. I don't know if you guys have run into this, but like if you have an employee and they leave, or even if they stay, or even doesn't have to be an employee, friend, whatever. And they modified their GPG sig and they push it back up to GitHub. Suddenly all your little, are they blue? I think they are. They all just sort of disappear. And you're like, what happened to my signed commits? Is the key compromised? So it's a nice start. But that's interesting to think about it from the point of view of like the green lock. That's going to give me a moment of pause.
My thought too was like, yeah, there's a vigilant mode, but like, do people even know it exists? And that's kind of tough. Like, if we put the responsibility on the end user, then we have to make sure it's really clear, like, how to make this more secure. And I didn't know vigilant mode existed until today. I mean, maybe that's just my ignorance, but I feel like there's got to be better messaging.
Well, an aspect of that too, I think, speaks to the idea of a long-running theme this year of secure defaults and secure design. GPG does not have the best UX. There's the why Johnny can't encrypt and so on. But it still is useful. I've turned it on for my personal repos, so I've liked it. And I want to tie that into a couple other articles I had. One was about a SharePoint pre-auth RCE chain, which is a wonderful security write-up. So it's one of those write-ups that we like to highlight that shows the attacker mindset going through an idea about, hey, I wonder if this area is vulnerability. 2 days later, they found some vulns. That glosses over some really interesting technical research, but what it also boiled down to was they took advantage of the JWT, and for those of you out here who are familiar with JWT and security issues probably know where this is going, in the sense of turning that algorithm into none rather than a SHA-256. So no signing for these, and it would get an unsigned token because the alg was none was accepted. Already the best practices RFC for JWT tokens says, please don't do this. We know this is a problem. But this is another theme that if you already have to have some best practices or hardening guides, maybe your defaults aren't secure. And I have a couple other ideas on that, but one more point on that, but I'm curious. Let me stop being the one talking the whole time.
Got one I'm going to say really quickly, then I'm curious thoughts. Excuse me, I'm catching your cough thing over the internet. So part of the reason I try to structure stories the way I do on this show is for our listeners to occasionally go, hey, that's sort of interesting. I want to look into that a little bit further and like maybe learn something or get entertained or, have a funny haha. For me personally, and I don't know what you guys are or anyone else on the internet, if I'm browsing around or if there's a new news story out there, something about, security or compiling or whatever else, if it's something I'm using, well, obviously if it's a patch, I'm going to go and try and patch it, hopefully, and see if it's already been patched. But frequently for these sort of code or vuln things, especially with something like auth, I'll go in wherever I'm working. I'll go, hey, what happens if I put in JWT with no authentication on it, with the none? And I'm not pointing against my friends in this particular case, but like that seems like. Do you guys do that? I'd be curious to hear from our listeners. Do you go and poke the bear when you see a new vulnerability out there, or do you just wait for someone else to do it?
I'm a little different than you, John. Like, I don't necessarily like go and like mess with it. But I do research it, right? Like, so today I have an article that maybe we'll talk about later if we have enough time, where we talk about like remote code execution as well. And I'm just like, oh, cool. Like, what's RCE? Like, let's go learn about it. And like, let's go figure out like how it could even like show up in my app. Is it on my scanner somewhere? Like, have I run into it and I didn't know? But I'm also a little earlier on in my career than probably a lot of our listeners are. So I don't feel yet like confident enough to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to go like mess with that without like blowing everything up. But maybe that's what I need to do. I don't know.
If things blow up, that's its own separate. You're still doing the right thing, I think. That's me.
Yeah. Thank you. But I'm actually curious, like, John, like, where do you even start with, like, poking the bear, as you say? Like, how, like, do you do it on, like, a sandboxed project that you have? Like, do you go to, like, a intentionally vulnerable web app and you're like, I'm going to find all, like, the RCs in here? Like, what do you do?
Is this being recorded? And seriously, no, I've done it in prod in companies before.
Okay.
I mean, if it's a website and it's public, I'll grab burp and I'll plan it out and go, let's see what happens when I do those. Do I get an error? Or, that's something that I would presume I'm not the first. We're doing a lot of foreshadowing here. There's another one's coming up talking about 90 seconds to bang. But a lot of this type of stuff is, yeah, I've got no problem doing that in prod. If it's something I'm more learning about, I want to see both sides of the app, then I'll get like damn vulnerable, whatever, pick your poison, and then see, okay, what's in the back end, what's in the front? Okay, can I modify the back end to stop it? And then it becomes a real learning experience. But frequently whatever's quickest and easiest. Because part of the thing, Mike and I have talked about this before, for doing demos or for doing a lot of this type, it takes a lot of time to set that up, right, Kara? Like, if you're going to go and build your lab and get all your pieces, that's half a day by itself, or it can be. And if I want to check really quickly, like, twitter.com, what happens if I pass in a JWT with none as my auth type? What happens? Is it going to take it or not? Just have at it.
Tie that in with the conversation too about bug bounty. If you get a bug bounty finding to come in and it's legit, where else does that exist in your code? Because that researcher may not have seen everything. So you want to say, do we fix this one instance, or do we actually go and scan to figure out where else does this work? There's a question here too. Are we using JWTs as part of our session management? Are we exposed to this? And the other link I included here too is that I always like to use these as examples of not even just are we exposed, how could this apply, whether in principle, but do we want to actually change the design? And this is why I included a link to Posado as a good contrast to JWT, because Posado is, they said, we fix all of the bad things that came into JWT. And specifically, they have a versioning approach to these defaults. So rather than say, you can have crypto agility and do whatever you wish, we're going to have an opinionated default, and this is our signing approach. If it's going to change, we're just going to bump the version. And now if there's a version mismatch, that's hopefully easier and simpler to identify, or to say we shouldn't support this mismatch versus, oh, this algorithm, I'm going to adjust on the server side and support this none algorithm because it was declared as such. So that kind of conveys why I also like that from a design perspective.
Mm. I agree with you. I'm backing up for a second, but no, we've talked about Posados. Actually, it's funny you mentioned. I was researching for something else a few weeks ago. Really started diving into both of them, and the closer you look at it, it's sort of a no-brainer. But it still seems, at least to me, to be in the minority compared to what's used out there. On my previous comments, I will stand by them 100%. But just before the lawyers come after me, not that I don't know if we have lawyers, but for our listeners, if depending on where you are in the world, going in, poking at a public website, be careful about what you do before you do it. I personally think it's completely legitimate and something you can back up and have a good argument for, but you might get a visit from authorities or companies, so just be careful.
Know your bug bounty program for your CFAA, indeed. So real quick, so let's go to a couple other vulns, including some stuff Akira was mentioning. Before we get to that RCE, on the theme of designs. So I grabbed gpu.zip. So here is yet another side channel. This is one of those articles that's really neat, in fact, but goes into some technical detail and is one of those things that I wouldn't necessarily say everybody needs to read and understand about. But one of the reasons I include an article like this is how can we talk about architecture? How can we talk about something else that is adjacent to this? In this case, to paraphrase from the write-up, is that this side channel attack, which is basically a pixel stealing. So it's taking advantage of what the GPU itself is doing, and it impacts Chrome because of three specific reasons. And Chrome allows cross-origin iframes to be loaded with cookies. Chrome allows rendering of SVG filters on those iframes, and Chrome delegates the rendering tasks to the GPU. Now, what the write-up points out is that Firefox and Safari, not sure about Edge, but don't meet these criteria and therefore aren't vulnerable to this specific type of side channel attack. And this speaks to an interesting aspect of choices in architecture and design, because these browsers are still supporting the HTTP, HTML standards, SVG, all these web standards to a degree, but they've done some subtly different choices that have, in the case of Firefox and Safari, they didn't know about this attack class, but their architecture prevented them from being vulnerable to this attack class. So this is what I wanted to kind of highlight as an example of, rather than just talk about this type of vuln all the time, try to figure out how do we talk about designs or defaults that help us be more secure. And I'm still trying to figure out what are the good ways of presenting that in very quick, succinct manners without losing our audience, because we don't want to, we want to take to heart what we were just talking about with Lena. But that's why I pulled in that article.
So I'm curious if one of you can, in a succinct manner, talk a little bit about what is a side channel attack, because I'm still trying to figure out what it is. So maybe some of our newer listeners might like to know that as well.
Side channel attacks are fun. Basically, you also known as, look up an Oracle as well, as in the Oracle of Delphi, not the Oracle of your billing department is familiar with. But it's basically leaking information through related behavior of the system. So that's me being too generic. But in this case, like a CPU side channel attack is you're observing the side effects of an operation. Like what are the cache hits? You're measuring something like the amount of power being consumed. You're measuring the timing it takes to complete an operation. And that timing has implications for multiplication versus addition, for example. These are some crypto side channels. So if you see that a CPU is spending its time on what looks like an addition, and then a multiplication, that's giving you some hints about how that's factoring, or how that CPU is doing some math operations on a secret key, for example, on an RSA key. In this case with the GPU, it's giving away some hints about what is this image that's being rendered. And that image, might have, I'm losing my voice as well. But the idea is that there's privileged information that should stay within this environment, this ring 0 or whatever, but it's the operations that are happening with this piece of information are observable. These second order operations are observable to someone outside that security boundary. And based on those observations, they can see, this is someone who's running with root privilege, or here's someone who is measuring string. Why this is another real quick example why you do constant string comparisons in crypto, for example, with passwords, so that you don't see that John's password was 12 characters, Akira's was 14 characters, and mine was 8 characters. That just gives you a sense that it takes a lot less time to calculate an 8-character password than it does a 16 if you're not doing constant time. So I don't know how quick that was. I forgot to set a timer, but there's the quick side channel, Akira. So we'll be taking a pop quiz at the end of the episode.
Oh, cool. Thank you. If you guys want something crazy to look at acoustic cryptanalysis.
Yes.
It is a type of side channel attack that essentially exploits sounds that are emitted by computers. So if you want to freak yourself out, read
and
about
a good
that
pun,
tonight.
because if you also want to check out Van Eck freaking, that's another grade of old school side channels. You are also impressed by an RCE this week, Akira. Tell us a little bit about that.
RCE, yes. So what I was impressed by, essentially, this is talking about a remote code execution. Oops, my article isn't opening. 1 second. Let's try this one more time. Maybe it's a side channel attack. Oh my God. Here we go. 1 second, guys. Sorry. Article isn't opening. Okay, here we go. So, in the WSFTP software, there was quite a lot of vulnerabilities found. This product is used by 40 million people. It's a file transfer product, and that's, to follow Lena's example, that is why this matters, is there's a lot of people that use it. The most severe bug allowed for a pre-authenticated remote code execution to happen without any user interaction. Now, normally, a remote code execution, from my understanding, happens only if a user sort of kicks it off, right? So remote code execution essentially is when someone can run code that is not yours on a browser or something along those lines. But what really interested me in this one is that the user didn't have to be involved. And I thought that was crazy. I didn't know that remote code execution could actually happen without any user interaction at all. So that was just something that was kind of interesting to me. And I was curious if Mike or John, if you had seen RCE without user interaction in your careers, and if you had, how you dealt with
the zero
that.
click. We dealt with it was it 2 weeks ago? And then a little bit of a follow-up last week talking about the libwebp vulnerability. That was a zero click that was hitting the iOS systems. And what's gnarly about that one, again, using technical language, is that, as you pointed out, Akira, it doesn't require user interaction. So I could send, the attacker can send a victim an image, and if their iMessage attempts to render it, boom, they've been compromised. Now, one of the things that was neat about that, to go on my side channel tangent of design and architecture, is that the iOS, this was a flaw in the blast door design, but their lockdown mode actually prevented this because it didn't do the automatic rendering of images. So this is why I wanted to highlight that, in the sense of there are design choices that you can do to minimize the impact of the mythical 0 days, or figure out, or understanding your threat model, what are those zero-click type of interaction points where something is going to render an image, a video, HTML, or other notoriously terrible blobs, user-generated blobs that are that need to be parsed. John, what would you say differently, perhaps, than I did there?
No, I think you did a great job both on that and on the side channel description. I thought that's really well done. So I would probably caveat, I'd rephrase the question a little bit. When I think the way you're saying it, Akira RCE, I mean, any remote code execution I do, if I'm like a pen tester or whatever have you, I'm here, you're over there. If I can pop you without you having to do anything, that's remote code execution. So more of a drive-by attack. So from that point of view, yeah, that's the way I think about it. But I think that's a small detail. This one got a at least from my radar, got a decent amount of media coverage, but I don't think we were covered Move It.
No,
Mike.
yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
why
and it's interesting. We should probably maybe to the end of the year we'll have a episode where we talk about how and why we choose different articles, because I think there's different. Obviously, as we're trying to explain here, these are why some of these articles appeal. We try to explain when we bring them up, but usually the malware and the ransomware areas I don't typically hit on from AppSec because what new is there to talk about other than just saying. Sure, LLM and ChatGPTs can do that as well, but I don't think that makes the case worse. It's just different. And
I don't bring that up to it's not that we, at least not it, I think the reason I'm bringing it up, and I know we need to move along, but like it's not so much we think it's not important, but like there's two of us here and sometimes three or maybe four. And it's interesting to see who picks different articles. There's a few this week, which might grab like the GPU one and something else that like I had in my list too. And so you only see them one of our lists, but it's you'd expect to get fairly decent coverage across two or three of us. And sometimes we're still like, nah.
No, and there's all things that can just come to surprise at different people at different levels, at points in their career. One of those surprises can also be Akira, once again. $250 or for the low price of sponsoring but one lonely Application Security Weekly podcast, you too could have either a bunny loader malware or just sponsor us instead. But if you could recover yourself, Akira, tell us about this article.
Yeah, sure. I'm recovered. It's all good. So what attracted me in the world of like, why do we add these articles? When I add an article, I usually do it because I found it, like there was like something in that article that I was like, oh my God, like I had no idea that even existed. And in this case, I didn't know, and it's okay. I mean, I don't know everything. I mean, I do, but I didn't know that malware as a service was the thing that was actually being sold. And of course, like that makes sense now to me. Like, well, yeah, of course, people would like make these sort of products that people can download. But the second thing that drew me, of course, to all articles are the funny titles, and I love the title Bunny Loader. So if you, like me, were ignorant of something called malware as a service, essentially you think of software as a service, but it's malware, right? So people are writing malware and they're distributing it. And these are like legitimately businesses, right? Like they have pricing models. They have, maybe they have subscriptions, like you can buy it straight out. This one, you can buy it for $250 and then you just have this malware as a service. And this one is called Bunny Loader. This one I thought was really cool actually though, because you can look at the changelog of the different versions. So for example, in version 1.6, is September 12th, 2023, there was something called an anti-sandbox technique that was added. And I looked into this a little bit more too, because I didn't really understand like, well, okay, what is an anti-sandbox technique? Essentially what happens here is that sometimes security people will put essentially what's called a sandbox around a particular environment so they can test things within that sandbox to make sure that, they essentially don't bust things outside of the sandbox. So they don't take down production, things like that. This is just my understanding of it so far. This malware can then detect if something is within a sandbox and act accordingly, which I thought was really interesting. So that was just like a little takeaway that I took away from it too, is that first off, there is something called a sandbox, and then there are malware capabilities to take away these abilities of the sandbox to protect your software. If you go to the article, you can also see just like all the change logs. It's just really fascinating to see like all the things they've added. It was released on September 4th, and they're already on version 2.0. Which is kind of amazing. They're like really developing this very quickly.
Version inflation. Akira, we're going to send you off with some homework too to check out. If you want some more other fun stuff, check out access brokers or initial access brokers for yet another type of fun underground community. And the sandboxing and it can also be like, am I running in a virtual system like a honeypot? Is often a question that comes up. And John, you got an article about AWS, and they've got some honeypots that get busted pretty quickly.
Look at that tie-in, folks. This is why we're professionals. And speaking of being professionals, if you're interested in sponsoring us, you can go to scmagazine.com/contact us and look at the sales section. Since we mentioned sponsoring. Yeah, so this was a fun one. And it popped up in my feed sometime in the last week. So let's set stage. Honeypot's been a fan for a very, very long time. There's a honeypot book somewhere on the bookshelf behind me. But why do not many people run them? They're really difficult operationally to keep going. You have to make sure that it's broken in the right way. You have to expose it. You have to look at the results coming out of it. It's like you need a pretty good amount of work, right? It's you probably want to have them distributed around so that the bad guy doesn't go, oh, that's a honeypot. So it's how you do these right. There's a bit of an art to getting these set up. But it turns out someone over at AWS, last name, horrible person I am. But anyways, an engineer over there had an idea. I believe is an engineer. God, I'm even wrong if I get that. My apologies. But they have gone ahead and they've built a honeypot network. And so they've got a post out there talking about what it is, what they're doing with it. Sort of neat that the results from it actually, the learnings get fed back into some of their commercial products. But what I thought was sort of interesting, there's many, it's a good post, I think, but one of the things which caught my eye here, if I search really quickly, is how quickly, and I mean, we've seen back, since the early 2000s, if you put an unpatched Microsoft system unpatched Windows system on the network internet, it would get compromised. I think it used to be 30 minutes. It was fairly quick. It wasn't like that, but it was fairly quick. So these guys saying now, within approximately 90 seconds of launching a new sensor in our MadPot honeypot, we can observe that the workload has been discovered by probe. So people, the malicious folks out there, probably malicious. Within 90 seconds, they're like, hey, something's there. And then from there, another 3 minutes on average, they're able to go ahead and start compromising or start penetrating that workload. So you've got 4.5 minutes, folks. And I think this is interesting because partially it's Amazon, right? So they've got a huge IP space. But at the same time, folks know that you're going to get a lot of stuff going up and down there. So it's probably being just constantly scanned nonstop. But anyways, I thought that was interesting. It's from an AppSec point of view, one of the things we like to think about is what attacks are coming at us. What attacks do we want? Should we be defending against? Should we be defending against everything? If I open just one port on my firewall and I've got a honeypot behind it, what does it suddenly start seeing versus if it's wild? So, Akira, there's your second homework for the week is to spin up a honeypot. Go ahead, put it out on Amazon and...
Okay, so this is actually a question for you because from what I understand, like you just said earlier too, honeypots can take a while or they're kind of resource intensive to build. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, so do you think, this is a completely selfish question, do you think that it is wise for startups to employ the usage of honeypots?
Nope.
Why?
because of that time. So you got 4.5 minutes.
See if I can talk and
you got the time it takes to exploit a honeypot, John. Go.
It's gonna take. I mean, really, the first, think about how long it takes to set up like a Linux box. Just like bring that bad boy up on net. Even if you do it from an AMI over at Amazon, or if you're like, a Raspberry, what have you, just getting that bad boy booted and up and going, and clicking through the first, unless you've got like an automated Red Hat deployment, the first few times you do it are Windows. You're looking at probably 20, 30 minutes, and then you need to get your network set up and your software installed and blah, 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 blah. So really what the magic is here is these guys have done all that work. They've, one way or another, they've snapshotted that thing in either a container or an AMI or what have you. And then they're able to spin them up out through the distributed worldwide network, which they now have. So it's the planning is what take time. It's not so much the honeypot itself. It's, if you want, like I said, I mean, go ahead and grab like something, leave it on your corporate office when you go off on vacation, and when you come back, you'll see if you've got any issues. But yeah, so that's the thing. And then I have to finish with the one sort of the hot take. Security data lakes.
Ooh, excellent. And I think absolutely useless is going to have to be where we absolutely end. So I want to thank John and Akira for joining us. Please go back and listen to our segment with Lena too. It was a great one. Thank you everyone for joining us. Please do subscribe, hit that like button, check out the show notes. And speaking of spending time, Check out Tech Noir 2 from the new album Unicorn by Gunship. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.